Jasper Blake didn't mind the darkness of the hospital corridors. In fact, he preferred it. The flickering fluorescent lights, the echo of his worn boots against the polished floors, the faint hum of the ventilation system, it was all part of his routine. Night shift, the silent shift. The one where he could simply blend in, unnoticed. Just the way he liked it. For years, he had worked as a janitor, wiping down the same surfaces, mopping the same floors, tending to the quiet spaces that others often forgot. It was mundane, repetitive, but it paid the bills. And in his line of work, simplicity was a blessing. No one really noticed him. Not the doctors, not the nurses, not even the patients. But that was just how he wanted it. He was an invisible presence in the backdrop of the hospital's operations. He'd passed by the same faces for years, each one immersed in their own lives, rarely looking up as he swept and mopped. Jasper wasn't much to look at, not in the conventional sense. His uniform, a faded green jumpsuit with patches of dirt on the sleeves, was as unremarkable as the man wearing it. His boots, scuffed and broken in, echoed off the walls as he moved with methodical precision. Tonight, though, something was different. The air in the hospital was thick, a subtle tension in the atmosphere. It felt heavier, like something was about to happen. Jasper could sense it, even though he couldn't put his finger on it. As he pushed his mop along the floor, he overheard snippets of conversations between the nurses and security guards. They whispered about strange things happening, people being in places they shouldn't be, odd signals that no one could explain. His curiosity piqued, but he quickly dismissed it. It wasn't his job to get involved with things like that. His job was simple: clean the floors, empty the trash, and stay out of the way. Yet, despite himself, his eyes kept drifting toward the ICU wing. He had seen the old hallways and rooms 1,000 times before, yet tonight, something about them felt off. Room 204, specifically, caught his attention. It had been occupied by Helen for months, a woman who had been in a deep coma since an accident. She hadn't shown any signs of life, not a twitch, not a single breath outside of the steady rhythm of the machines monitoring her vitals. But tonight, as Jasper passed her door, something felt different. A flicker of light. A slight movement. The kind of motion you only see out of the corner of your eye. He paused, wiping his hand on the back of his pants, trying to shake off the feeling that had settled in his chest. He had no reason to be concerned. Helen was a patient, a case, just like all the others. She was beyond saving. The doctors had said so countless times. But there was something about her, something that had always made him look twice when he passed her room. The way she was always so still, so silent. And tonight, it felt as if the silence had become a little louder. For a brief moment, he considered ignoring it. After all, it wasn't his responsibility. But he couldn't help himself. He found his feet moving toward the door of room 204, his heart beating a little faster now. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to go inside. He opened the door, quietly, carefully, and stepped into the dim room. The soft beeping of the machines filled the space, the only sound that accompanied his slow steps. Helen's face was pale, almost ghostly in the faint light. Her chest rose and fell with a mechanical rhythm, the machines doing their job, keeping her alive, or at least maintaining the illusion of life. Jasper approached her bed, his movements cautious. He reached out, hovering for a second before placing his hand on the edge of the bed. As he did, his eyes flickered down at the pale, fragile hand resting on the blanket. And then, for the briefest of moments, he saw it. A twitch. It was so slight that, had he blinked, he would have missed it. But he didn't blink. Jasper stood frozen for a moment, heart hammering in his chest, the world around him suddenly feeling heavier. Helen's fingers had moved. Not much, but enough to make him second-guess everything. His hand shook slightly as he pulled it away from the bed. Was this a sign? Could she be waking up? He quickly checked the machines, looking for any indication that something had changed. But everything was still steady. The monitors were all beeping at the same pace. Still, that small twitch, that faint sign of movement, had shaken something inside him. He lingered in the room a moment longer before slowly retreating, his steps quiet, his mind racing. What was going on? As Jasper left room 204, he noticed something else. The hallway was emptier than usual. The janitor's closet door, which he had left open earlier, was now ajar. He stopped for a moment, eyeing the hallway. Something about the stillness felt off. There was a subtle hum in the air, an energy that hadn't been there before. He wasn't sure what it was, but it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He had no idea why, but his instincts told him something was wrong. That was when he saw it. A group of men, well-dressed, silent, and moving with purpose, were entering the hospital, their footsteps firm but quiet. They were headed toward the administrative section. Jasper caught a glimpse of their faces as they passed. They were wearing sunglasses despite the late hour. They looked out of place. Their presence felt deliberate. But he couldn't stop to investigate. He wasn't supposed to be involved in anything. His job was simple. But the weight in his chest grew heavier as he watched them disappear into the depths of the building. And then there was the locked door. He had always known about it. The door that led to an old storage room in the back corner of the hospital, past the ICU. It had been locked for as long as he had worked there. But tonight, as he glanced toward it, there was something about it that felt different. Something that beckoned him. Jasper felt an overwhelming urge to go toward it. Maybe it was just his curiosity, or maybe it was the strange feeling in the air, but he couldn't ignore it anymore. The door was locked, yes. But it wasn't locked for long. With one swift motion, he pulled a small tool from his pocket, a tool he had carried with him since his days in the military. It was old, but it worked. The lock clicked open. Inside, the room was shrouded in darkness. Only the faint light from the hallway spilled in, casting long shadows. Jasper's heart beat faster as he stepped inside. The air in the room was musty, thick with dust. But it wasn't the dust that drew his attention. It was the row of files neatly stacked on a metal shelf in the corner. He walked over to them, running his fingers over the edges of the file folders. The names on the spines were faded, barely legible. But one file stood out. It was different from the others. A simple, worn label, Operation Ghost. Jasper hesitated for a moment, before he carefully pulled it out. Inside, he found a set of records, photos, and documents that made his pulse race. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through them. He recognized some of the names, some of the places. But what struck him the most was the final page. A photo, black and white, of a younger version of himself. The same cold, hard eyes staring back at him. And beneath it, the words, Warrig, operative in the field. Status, active. Jasper Blake's world shifted. He was no longer just the quiet janitor. He was something else, someone else. Jasper sat motionless in the dark room, his fingers still gripping the file as his mind tried to process the photo that had appeared before him. His younger self, staring back at him with the cold, determined eyes that had once been so familiar. It felt like a lifetime ago. The name, Warrig, burned into his memory as if it had never really left. He had buried that part of himself, locked it away in a box and pushed it deep down, but seeing that photo again, it was as if the walls he had so carefully constructed around his past were crumbling before him. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above and his own breath, shallow and rapid. The file in his hands weighed 1,000 pounds. He wasn't sure if it was the contents of the file or the implications of it that made him feel so heavy. Warrig. The name was a ghost, one he had thought long gone. Jasper had been a part of something bigger, something darker. He'd been an operative in a world of secrets, of covert operations, the kind of missions that were never supposed to see the light of day. There had been bloodshed, lies, deception. He had played his part, as he was trained to do, but when the war was over, so was he. Or so he had believed. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just the janitor he had grown to be. He wasn't just some forgotten soldier. His past had never left him. It had simply been waiting, lurking in the shadows, waiting to resurface. He didn't know who had left this file in the storage room, or why it was still here. But someone wanted him to remember. Someone wanted him to know that his past was catching up to him. The question that gnawed at his mind was simple: why? Why now? He had spent years living under the radar, doing menial work, making a quiet life for himself. What could have possibly pulled him back into this web? And then, as if to answer his question, there was a sound, a small click from the hallway. His heart skipped a beat. Someone was here. Jasper quickly shoved the file back into the shelf, the edges of the folder scraping against the metal, sending a small wave of panic through him. He moved swiftly but silently, his military training kicking in as he darted to the far corner of the room, staying hidden in the shadows. His breath caught as he strained to hear. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, approached the storage room door. He pressed himself against the wall, his eyes scanning the dimly lit space for a way out. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Whoever it was, they were just outside the door now. Jasper's mind raced. He had to get out. He couldn't afford to be seen here. This room wasn't supposed to be accessed, not by anyone. The hospital had been a place of quiet anonymity for years, but tonight, everything had changed. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and Jasper held his breath, listening intently. Then, with a faint squeak, the door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was a man in a black suit, a sharp silhouette against the dim light. His face was unreadable, his eyes scanning the room, but there was no sense of urgency in his movements. He wasn't searching for someone, he was simply waiting. Jasper's pulse hammered in his chest, his fingers brushing the edge of the metal shelf where the file had been. He had no choice. He had to leave. But the door was blocked. There was no way out without being seen. And just when Jasper thought he couldn't be more trapped, the man in the suit spoke, his voice low and steady. "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" The words hit Jasper like a slap, and for a moment, he could barely breathe. The man had said it with such casual authority, as if he knew exactly who Jasper was and exactly what had happened. How could he know? "You've been living in the shadows for too long, Jasper," the man continued, stepping further into the room. "You can't hide forever. We know everything. Everything." The words rattled in Jasper's mind. Who were these people? And how did they know about him, about Warwick? He felt a chill run down his spine. He had no answers. Only questions. Only dread. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small device. He pressed a button, and a holographic image flickered to life in the center of the room, hovering in the air. It was a series of images, fragments of memories, and Jasper recognized them immediately. Photos from his past. The covert operations. The blood. The chaos. The violence. The faces of the men he had worked with. And there, in the middle of it all, his own face, worn and grim. The image shifted, and another photo appeared, a woman this time. She was standing in front of an old building, her eyes narrowed, her hand gripping a file, just like the one Jasper had found. "Her name is Lena Rowe," the man said, his voice cutting through the stillness. "She was a part of your team, once. But she's gone now. She's dead. Dead." The word hung in the air, and for the briefest moment, Jasper felt his breath catch in his throat. Lena. She had been one of the few people he had trusted back then, one of the few who had understood the weight of what they were doing. He had always wondered what happened to her after the operation ended. But this was more than he could have ever imagined. "You think this is just about your past?" The man's voice broke through his thoughts. You think it's just some old mission you can forget? Jasper didn't respond. He couldn't. There were too many questions, too many emotions tangled in his chest. No, the man continued. This is about something much bigger. Something that you were part of, whether you want to admit it or not. Lena was just the beginning, Jasper. You and her, you're part of something that's been brewing for years. And now, we're ready to finish what we started. Finish what we started. The words hung in the air, thick with the promise of something terrible. Jasper's mind reeled. Was this why he had been dragged back into all of this? Because of something Lena had started? The man in the suit stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied Jasper. We've been keeping an eye on you, he said, his tone almost mocking. You've been doing a good job of staying out of the way. But it's time for you to come back. Time for you to finish what you started. Jasper's heart raced. I'm not part of this anymore. His voice came out hoarse, desperate. I left that life behind. The man smirked. You don't get to choose that, Jasper. You never did. The tension in the room thickened as the man turned and moved toward the door. Before he left, he glanced over his shoulder, his gaze cold and calculated. You'll hear from us again soon. And when you do, you'll have a choice to make. And with that, he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Jasper alone in the dim room. His breath came in heavy gasps as he sank to the floor, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had been pulled back in. He couldn't run anymore. There was no hiding from the past. He was tangled in it, whether he liked it or not. And Lena. Lena's death was just the beginning. But for Jasper Blake, it felt like the end of everything he had worked so hard to leave behind. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice through. Caleb stood by the window, looking out over the quiet, empty streets. His fingers twitched, the scars on his knuckles itching as if they were calling out for action. It had been years since he'd felt this kind of restlessness, but something about tonight, something about the way the moon hung low over the city, felt different. It was as if the world itself were waiting for something to break, and Caleb was bracing for it. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed, but he didn't need to check the caller ID. He already knew who it was. Caleb, we need to talk, came the voice on the other end of the line. It was Jack, his old partner. They had fought together, bled together, and lost more than they cared to admit. But in the end, it was always Jack who pulled him back from the brink, kept him tethered to something resembling normalcy. Caleb exhaled sharply, rubbing his jaw as he glanced back at the phone. Talk about what? I don't have time for this, man. Just meet me. The usual spot. 10 minutes, Jack replied, his voice tight, strained. Something was wrong, he could hear it. The urgency, the fear, it made the hairs on the back of Caleb's neck stand on end. Without another word, Caleb grabbed his jacket, the leather heavy in his hands, the familiar weight comforting, as if the past few years hadn't happened at all. He shoved his hands into his pockets and walked out the door, the cool night air hitting him like a slap across the face. The usual spot was just a few blocks away, an old diner that had been around since the 70s, tucked away in a quiet corner of town. It wasn't much, just a place for late-night coffee and greasy meals, but for Caleb and Jack, it was where things had started. Where their lives had been irrevocably changed. As he approached the diner, Caleb felt his heart rate increase, his instincts kicking in. He scanned the area, his eyes darting from one shadow to the next, but everything seemed calm. Too calm. He pushed the door open, the familiar jingle of the bell above it causing him to pause for just a moment. Inside, the diner was empty, save for Jack, sitting at the far booth, his back to the window. Caleb could tell right away that something wasn't right. Jack's usual confident posture was gone, replaced by a tension that Caleb could practically feel from across the room. Taking a slow breath, Caleb made his way over to the booth, sliding into the seat across from his partner. Jack didn't speak at first, his eyes avoiding Caleb's gaze, staring instead at the coffee cup in front of him, the steam rising lazily from the surface. "Talk to me, Jack," Caleb said, his voice low but firm. He didn't need to ask what was going on, he already knew. Jack was hiding something, and Caleb wasn't going to let it slide. Jack finally looked up, his eyes tired, haunted. "It's not just the job anymore, Caleb. He paused, his voice faltering for the first time in years. "This is bigger than anything we've ever dealt with." Caleb frowned, his heart pounding in his chest as Jack leaned in closer, lowering his voice even more. "There's a man," Jack continued, "a man we thought was dead. But he's not. And he's got ties to everything, everyone we've been up against. If he gets what he's after, it's over. For everyone." The weight of Jack's words sank into Caleb's bones like lead. The man Jack was talking about wasn't just anyone. He was someone from their past, a ghost, a name that had haunted them for years. The kind of man who didn't leave survivors, who didn't play by anyone's rules. And now, he was back. "How do you know?" Caleb asked, his jaw clenched, every muscle in his body tensed and ready to move. "Because he's been watching me," Jack replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's got eyes everywhere, Caleb. And he knows we're onto him." The air between them grew heavier with each word, thick with the realization of what was at stake. It was no longer just about surviving, about getting through the next mission. This was personal. They were no longer just soldiers, they were targets. Caleb let out a slow breath, his eyes narrowing as he thought about their options. He knew Jack, he could see the fear in his eyes, even if he couldn't hear it in his voice. This wasn't just another assignment. This was something that would change everything. "So what now?" Caleb asked, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. Jack looked at him, his expression grave. "We finish this. We finish it now, before it finishes us." There was no hesitation in Caleb's reply. "Let's go." As they stood up, Caleb's mind was already running through the plan, his body moving on autopilot as they left the diner, the door swinging shut behind them with a sharp click. The world outside had gone silent, as if it, too, was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable.